The word exploded across the marble halls of one of the most exclusive corporate events in the world. 500 billionaires, tech moguls, and industry titans turned in shock as an 8-year-old black boy in a worn school uniform pointed directly at the stage, at the man worth $12 billion, at Marcus Thompson, the Google CEO who had just been discussing artificial intelligence and market disruption. But this wasn't about technology. This wasn't about business. This was about a secret that had been buried for 12 years, hidden behind corporate success stories and carefully crafted public images. A secret that was about to explode in front of rolling cameras and international media, changing everything in ways that no amount of money could control or contain. You're about to witness one of the most shocking confrontations ever captured on live television. A cleaning lady's son, invisible to the wealthy elite surrounding him, is about to turn the business world upside down with a truth so devastating that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, privilege, and the price of abandoning those who love you most. What happens when the past you spent billions trying to bury suddenly stands up and calls you Dad in front of the entire world? When the child you abandoned to build an empire refuses to stay invisible any longer? When love and DNA collide with corporate image and calculated success? This isn't just a story about money and power. This is about justice delayed but not denied. About a mother's 12-year struggle to raise a brilliant son alone while his billionaire father conquered industries and collected trophies. About a boy who inherited his father's eyes, his intelligence, and his stubborn refusal to accept dismissal when seeking truth. Stories like this need to be told, because they remind us that behind every empire built on abandoned promises, there are real people paying the price. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what unfolds next will leave you speechless. This 8-year-old is about to teach a room full of billionaires the most expensive lesson of their lives. The cleaning lady in the corner is holding her breath. The security guards don't know whether to intervene or watch history unfold. And Marcus Thompson, the man who could buy and sell companies with a phone call, is about to learn that some debts can't be paid with money. They can only be paid with truth. Watch what happens when 12 years of silence finally find their voice. The black limousine glided through downtown like a shadow of power. Chrome gleamed under the afternoon sun, reflecting the faces of curious onlookers pressed against the sidewalk barriers. Inside, Marcus Thompson, CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, adjusted his platinum cufflinks. The scent of Italian leather filled the air around him. His net worth had just crossed $12 billion. Today's corporate summit would cement his legacy forever. Camera flashes erupted like lightning as the vehicle approached the Grand Hotel entrance. Photographers shouted his name from behind velvet ropes, their voices creating a symphony of desperation for the perfect shot. The billionaire security detail had arrived 30 minutes earlier, transforming the lobby into an impenetrable fortress. Red carpet stretched from the curb to the golden doors, each step calculated to project absolute dominance. This wasn't just an arrival, it was a coronation. Bodyguards in black suits emerged first, their earpieces crackling with coordination codes. The crowd held its collective breath as polished shoes touched the pavement. Marcus stepped out, his custom-tailored suit worth more than most people's annual salary. The afternoon light caught the silver in his temples, adding gravitas to his commanding presence. Every movement spoke of a man who had conquered industries and reshaped economies, but some secrets refused to stay buried. The hotel lobby buzzed with 500 of the world's most influential leaders. Tech moguls whispered about market disruptions while oil executives discussed geopolitical strategies. The air thick with expensive cologne and the weight of trillion-dollar decisions. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors imported from Italian quarries. This was where the powerful gathered to divide the world's wealth among themselves. Yet today, something unexpected would shatter their carefully constructed reality. Marcus nodded to familiar faces as he moved through the crowd. His publicist whispered last-minute talking points while his assistant confirmed the evening schedule. The keynote speech would address artificial intelligence's role in reshaping global economics. Fortune 500 CEOs waited eagerly for insights that could generate billions in new revenue. But the most important conversation of his life was still 20 minutes away, and it would come from the most unlikely source imaginable. Security cameras tracked every angle as he approached the main auditorium. The production crew had spent 3 days perfecting the lighting for maximum visual impact. His speech would be broadcast live to financial markets across 6 continents. Every word carefully crafted to move stock prices and influence government policies. The stage awaited like a throne, elevated above the assembled masses. Power had always been his greatest addiction, more intoxicating than any drug. The crowd parted before him like water, creating a pathway of reverence and fear. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned to catch a glimpse of the legendary billionaire. His reputation preceded him into every room. Ruthless in business, charitable in public, mysterious in private life. The media had tried for years to uncover his personal story, but Marcus had buried his past deeper than oil reserves. Today, that past would rise from the shadows like a ghost demanding justice. Applause thundered through the space as he stepped toward the podium. Hands that controlled global supply chains and international banking systems brought together in synchronized appreciation. The sound echoed off gilded walls, a reminder of the empire he had built from nothing, or so the official biography claimed. But empires built on lies eventually crumble, and the truth always finds a way to surface. Sometimes it comes wrapped in innocence, wearing the face of a child. As Marcus reached for the microphone, adjusting it with practiced confidence, he had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to explode. The audience settled into expectant silence, smartphones recording every moment for social media posterity. Corporate logos glowed behind him like modern hieroglyphs of commerce. But somewhere in the crowd, hidden among the invisible workforce that made events like this possible, a pair of young eyes had already spotted their target. And those eyes belonged to someone who would change everything with just one word. While cameras focused on the billionaire's every gesture, an entirely different world moved in the shadows. The cleaning staff glided between tables like ghosts, their uniforms rendering them nearly invisible to the wealthy elite. Among them, Sarah Williams pushed a cart filled with fresh linens and polishing supplies. Her callous hands bore the evidence of 20 years spent maintaining spaces she could never afford to inhabit. The scent of industrial detergent clung to her uniform, a sharp contrast to the designer perfumes floating through the air. Beside her walked 8-year-old Jamal, his school uniform pressed despite its worn edges. His mother couldn't afford childcare today, and the hotel manager had reluctantly agreed to let him stay quiet in the back. The boy's eyes sparkled with wonder as he took in the marble columns and crystal fixtures. Everything gleamed like a palace from the fairy tales his mother read to him each night. But fairy tales rarely featured little black boys from projects, and princes certainly didn't clean office buildings for minimum wage. Sarah's supervisor had been clear about the rules. Remain invisible, work efficiently, and under no circumstances interact with the guests. The wealthy preferred their comfort, without reminders of the labor required to maintain it. She guided Jamal behind a service pillar, hoping to keep him out of sight until the speeches ended. Her heart carried the weight of single motherhood, each day a careful balance between survival and dreams. Today felt different somehow, charged with an energy she couldn't quite identify. The boy watched security guards with their serious expressions and expensive suits. He studied waiters carrying silver trays worth more than his mother's monthly rent. But his attention kept drifting toward the stage where the important man stood speaking about technology and progress. Something about the man's voice stirred a memory buried deep in his 8-year-old consciousness. A voice from bedtime stories his mother used to tell, before she stopped talking about the past altogether. Jamal tugged at his mother's uniform sleeve, whispering questions about the fancy people and their beautiful clothes. Sarah answered in hushed tones, explaining about different kind of work and different kind of people. She didn't mention that she had once dreamed of wearing designer dresses herself, or that she had briefly lived in a world where such dreams seemed possible. Some chapters of life are too painful to revisit, even in whispered conversations with curious children. The cleaning cart wheels squeaked softly against the marble floor as they moved closer to get a better view. Sarah told herself it was just curiosity, but something deeper pulled her forward. The familiar cadence of the speaker's voice triggered memories she had spent years trying to suppress. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the cart handle, fighting the urge to turn around and leave immediately. But Jamal had spotted something that made him stop breathing entirely. His small body going rigid with recognition. Workers in matching uniforms moved like synchronized dancers around the perimeter of the Great Hall. They refreshed water glasses and adjusted microphones with choreographed precision. Their presence acknowledged only when something went wrong. Sarah had mastered this invisibility over the years, learning to exist in spaces without truly being seen. But today, her son's eyes were fixed on the stage with an intensity that made her stomach clench with dread and hope in equal measure. The boy's breathing grew shallow as he studied the billionaire's profile, comparing it to images burned into his memory. Photos his mother thought she had hidden well enough. Yellowed newspaper clippings tucked between pages of old books. Stories about a young entrepreneur who had once promised to change the world before he disappeared from their lives entirely. The resemblance was undeniable, even across the vast distance between poverty and power, between remembering and forgetting. As Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie and prepared to deliver the evening's main address, he remained completely unaware of the two figures watching from shadows. The cleaning lady who once knew his touch, and the child who carried his DNA despite never carrying his name. The invisible workforce that maintained his world of privilege was about to become impossible to ignore, and the truth that money couldn't bury was standing just 50 feet away, dressed in a school uniform and wearing his father's eyes. The applause died down as Marcus began his prepared remarks about artificial intelligence revolutionizing global commerce. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Board members nodded approvingly, while journalists scribbled notes that would move markets before morning. The teleprompter displayed carefully crafted sentences designed to project strength and vision. But somewhere in the crowd, a small boy had stopped listening to words and started seeing something that made his heart race with impossible hope. Jamal pressed against the service pillar, his small hands gripping the marble edge until his knuckles turned white. The man on stage shared his angular jawline, the same deep-set eyes that stared back at him from bathroom mirrors. Even the way Marcus gestured with his left hand felt familiar, like movements Jamal had practiced unconsciously throughout his 8 years of life. His mother had always said he looked like his father, but she never explained why that made her cry in the shower when she thought he wasn't listening. Sarah noticed her son's unusual stillness and followed his gaze toward the podium. Her breath caught in her throat as recognition crashed over her like a cold wave. 12 years had added silver to Marcus's temples and lines around his eyes, but success hadn't changed the fundamental architecture of his face. The same face that had whispered promises in her ear during college, before ambition became more important than love, before she became an inconvenient reminder of the life he wanted to leave behind. The billionaire continued his speech about disrupting traditional industries and creating new wealth streams. His words painted visions of a future where technology would solve humanity's greatest challenges. But he had never solved the challenge of being a father, never disrupted his own pattern of running from responsibility. The irony hung in the air like expensive perfume, sweet and suffocating at the same time. Power could buy many things, but not redemption for abandoned children. Jamal's legs began moving before his mind could catch up, carrying him away from his mother's protective shadow. Each step toward the stage felt like walking through thick honey, time stretching impossibly slow. The wealthy crowd remained focused on Marcus's presentation about quarterly projections and market penetration strategies. None of them noticed the small black boy navigating between their designer shoes and platinum jewelry. Invisible children rarely register in rooms full of visible power. Sarah reached out desperately, her fingers barely missing Jamal's sleeve as he slipped beyond her grasp. 20 years of maintaining professional invisibility screamed at her to stay hidden, to pull her son back into the shadows where they belonged. But maternal instinct overrode survival training, and she began pushing to the crowd after him, her cleaning cart forgotten. She moved with the determination of a mother protecting her cub from predators who wore $1,000 suits. The boy's feet found their rhythm as he approached the front of the auditorium. His school shoes, polished that morning with drugstore paste, clicked against marble floors that cost more than his mother's annual salary. The sound seemed impossibly loud in his ears, though the crowd remained oblivious to his approach. Marcus's voice grew clearer with each step, Those familiar vocal patterns that had haunted Jamal's dreams finally attached to a living, breathing person. Security personnel stationed throughout the room maintained their professional vigilance, but their attention focused outward toward potential external threats. The idea that danger might come from within, wrapped in the innocent form of a child, never appeared on their tactical assessments. Their earpieces crackled with updates about perimeter security and exit strategies, while the real disruption walked steadily toward the stage in worn sneakers and determination. As Jamal reached the front row, now just 20 feet from the man who had shaped his existence through absence, time seemed to crystallize into a single, perfect moment. Marcus raised his hand to emphasize a point about leveraging synergies across multiple platforms, completely unaware that his own son was about to leverage the most powerful word in any language, a word that would shatter carefully constructed lies and force a reckoning that money couldn't buy or lawyers couldn't silence. The truth was about to speak with the voice of a child. Jamal's 8-year-old voice cut through the auditorium like a blade through silk. "Dad!" The word exploded from his chest with 12 years of accumulated longing, carrying the weight of bedtime stories where fathers came home, of birthday wishes never granted, of playground questions he couldn't answer. Every syllable echoed off marble walls and crystal chandeliers, bouncing between shocked faces before landing squarely in Marcus Thompson's chest like a physical blow. The billionaire's hand froze mid-gesture, his carefully rehearsed sentence dying on his lips. The teleprompter continued scrolling through talking points about market disruption, but the only disruption that mattered was standing 50 feet away in a school uniform. Marcus's face drained of color, his composed corporate mask slipping for the first time in decades. The word, "Dad," hung in the air like a confession, impossible to take back or explain away. 500 of the world's most powerful people turned in unison, their heads swiveling toward the source of the interruption, like predators sensing movement in tall grass. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lipstick mouths. The synchronized sound of collective breath being held created an eerie silence that seemed to stretch across continents. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause, afraid to disturb the moment that would change everything. Jamal stood perfectly still in the sudden spotlight of attention, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. His mother's warnings about staying quiet and invisible evaporated like morning mist. This was the moment he had been preparing for his entire life, even when he didn't know he was preparing. The fairy tale princes his mother read about always found their kingdoms eventually. Today he had found his king, and kings were supposed to acknowledge their sons. Marcus's security detail moved with practiced efficiency, their hands instinctively reaching for concealed weapons before training reminded them this was a child, not a threat. But perhaps they were wrong about that assessment. Children carrying truth often pose the greatest danger to empires built on lies. The head of security spoke urgently into his wrist microphone, requesting immediate backup for a situation no protocol manual had ever covered. Sarah Williams pushed through the crowd with desperate determination, her cleaning uniform a stark contrast to the designer gown surrounding her. She had spent 12 years hiding this secret, protecting both her son and her own heart from the pain of rejection. Now her carefully constructed walls were crumbling in front of 500 witnesses and a dozen television cameras. Her eyes met Marcus's across the crowded space, and suddenly there were 22 again, young and foolishly in love. The journalists in attendance recognized a story that would dominate headlines for months. Cameras that had been focused on corporate presentations swung toward the small boy whose single word had just shifted the entire trajectory of the evening. Social media notifications began pinging across the room as early videos hit Twitter and Instagram. The cleaning lady's son calling a billionaire dad was exactly the kind of content that broke the internet and launched 1,000 think pieces. Marcus's throat worked soundlessly, his vocal cords apparently forgetting how to form words under the weight of unexpected truth. Decades of boardroom negotiations and hostile takeovers had never prepared him for this moment. He could acquire companies worth billions with a signature, but he couldn't figure out how to respond to his own son's recognition. The silence stretched like a rubber band ready to snap, tension building toward an inevitable breaking point. The boy took another step forward, his young voice gaining strength with each word. "I know you're my father. Mama has your pictures hidden in her jewelry box. She cries when she looks at them, but she thinks I don't see. His confession split the air like thunder. Each revelation another crack in Marcus's carefully constructed facade. The truth was pouring out of an 8-year-old mouth, unstoppable as a flood, and just as destructive to everything in its path. The auditorium transformed into a pressure cooker of whispered speculation and barely contained shock. Corporate executives who routinely handled billion-dollar crises found themselves completely unprepared for playground-level honesty delivered in prime time. Board members exchanged meaningful glances across the crowd, their minds already calculating damage control strategies and stock price implications. The cleaning lady's son had just lobbed a grenade into the most exclusive corporate gathering of the year, and everyone could feel the explosion building. Technology moguls pulled out their phones with practiced discretion, fingers flying across screens as they fired off messages to crisis management teams. The story was already spreading through social media faster than wildfire through dry grass. Hashtag Billionaire Dad began trending within minutes, accompanied by grainy videos captured by audience members who had shifted from corporate networking to citizen journalism. The intersection of extreme wealth and hidden family secrets was exactly the kind of content that made platforms billions in advertising revenue. Sarah finally broke through the crowd barrier, her mother's instincts overriding every lesson about staying invisible in spaces like this. She reached for Jamal's hand, her fingers trembling as she tried to pull him back towards safety. But her son had tasted recognition for the first time in his young life, and he wasn't ready to disappear back into the shadows. His small body remained rooted to the marble floor with the determination of someone who had finally found his voice. The hotel's event security team struggled with a situation their training had never anticipated. Protocol demanded they remove any disruption immediately, but forcibly dragging a child away from his alleged father would create optics that could destroy careers. The head of security spoke urgently into his earpiece, requesting guidance from superiors who were probably watching this unfold on live television. Sometimes the most dangerous weapons come wrapped in innocence and school uniforms. International media representatives sensed blood in the water, their journalistic instincts overriding social etiquette. Cameras zoomed in on Marcus's face, capturing every microexpression for later analysis by body language experts and social media detectives. The same face that Grace magazine covered celebrating his business acumen now displayed raw vulnerability that money couldn't mask. Power meant nothing when an 8-year-old held the nuclear codes to your reputation. Corporate sponsors began receiving frantic phone calls from public relations teams trying to assess potential fallout. The event was being broadcast live to financial markets across 6 continents, and market futures were already showing volatility in response to the unfolding drama. A cleaning lady's son had just moved more money with 2 words than most people would see in their entire lifetimes. The markets hated uncertainty, and uncertainty was currently wearing sneakers and a school uniform. Wealthy attendees found themselves involuntary witnesses to the kind of raw human drama they usually paid premium prices to avoid. Private school educations and inherited fortunes hadn't prepared them for this level of emotional authenticity. Some pulled out their phones to record history in the making, while others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own buried secrets in Marcus's exposed vulnerability. Everyone had something they preferred to keep hidden from public scrutiny. The boy's courage seemed to grow with each passing second, fed by adrenaline and the intoxicating power of finally being seen. He had spent 8 years as background noise in his own story, watching other children with fathers who showed up to school plays and soccer games. Now, he stood center stage in front of the most important people in the world, demanding acknowledgement from the man whose DNA he carried. David facing Goliath, armed only with truth and childhood determination. As murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves across a disturbed pond, everyone waited for Marcus Thompson to respond. The billionaire who had built an empire on decisive action found himself paralyzed by the simplest question a man could face. Would he acknowledge his own son? The answer would either destroy his carefully crafted image or begin the process of rebuilding it on a foundation of truth instead of convenient lies. The fluorescent lights of State University's computer lab flickered overhead as 22-year-old Marcus Thompson worked through another all-nighter. His fingers flew across the keyboard, writing code that would eventually evolve into the algorithm that made him billions. But that night, his attention kept drifting to the beautiful black woman organizing research papers at the adjacent workstation. Sarah Williams was pursuing her master's degree in education while working 3 part-time jobs to pay tuition. Her determination matched his own ambition, but her path was littered with obstacles he would never face. Their first conversation began over shared frustration with the ancient computer system that crashed every 20 minutes. Marcus offered to help debug her thesis formatting, and Sarah reciprocated by sharing coffee and homemade sandwiches during their late-night study sessions. She spoke passionately about transforming public education, while he dreamed of revolutionizing how the world processed information. Young love bloomed between circuit boards and coffee cups, fueled by shared dreams and endless possibility. Those early months felt like a movie written specifically for them. Marcus would walk Sarah home through tree-lined campus streets, their conversations meandering between technology and philosophy, ambition and intimacy. She challenged his assumptions about privilege while he encouraged her dreams of opening schools in underserved communities. They built a private world where racial barriers seemed less important than the electricity that sparked between their intertwined fingers and synchronized heartbeats. The pregnancy test appeared during their senior year. 2 pink lines that would forever alter the trajectory of both their lives. Sarah stared at the results in her tiny apartment bathroom, while Marcus paced the living room, his mind already calculating how a baby would complicate his aggressive 5-year business plan. She dreamed of cribs and lullabies while he saw obstacles to the IPO timeline he had meticulously constructed. Love and ambition rarely follow the same compass. Marcus's acceptance to Stanford's MBA program arrived the same week Sarah confirmed the pregnancy. The full scholarship represented everything he had worked toward since childhood, his ticket to boardrooms where real power lived. But Stanford was 3,000 miles from Sarah's world of family support and familiar neighborhoods. He convinced himself that success would eventually benefit everyone, that building an empire required temporary sacrifices for long-term security. The night he told Sarah about his decision remains carved into both their memories like scar tissue. She sat on their second-hand couch, her hand unconsciously protecting the barely visible curve of her belly, while he explained his reasoning with a cold logic that would later make him billions. Opportunity knocks once, he said. They could reconnect after he established himself, after the baby was born, after success made everything easier, after always meant never. Marcus left for California on a Tuesday morning in early September, his car packed with everything he owned and nothing he needed most. Sarah watched from her apartment window as his taillights disappeared around the corner, carrying her heart and their shared future toward a horizon that didn't include her. She placed her palm against the glass, whispering promises to the child growing inside her about bedtime stories and birthday parties, about love that wouldn't disappear when ambition called. The years that followed were marked by silence on both sides. Sarah poured her heartbreak into raising Jamal while building a teaching career that was interrupted by economic necessity. She took night jobs cleaning offices to supplement her education salary, scrubbing the same type of marble floors where her son would eventually find his father. Marcus built his technology empire through strategic acquisitions and ruthless efficiency, burying memories of college love beneath layers of success and public acclaim. Now, 12 years later, those carefully buried memories were exploding into the present tense like archaeological evidence of a life Marcus had convinced himself never existed. The past wasn't past. It was standing 50 feet away in a school uniform, demanding acknowledgement with a fearless honesty that only children possess. The choices he made at 22 were about to be judged by a jury of 500 witnesses, and his own 8-year-old son, who had inherited his stubborn determination and Sarah's unshakable moral compass. The bus ride home from the hospital after Jamal's birth took 47 minutes through neighborhoods that seemed designed to remind young mothers of their limited options. Sarah cradled her newborn son against her chest, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger with the same determination she would need to raise him alone. The city lights blurred past the window like fallen stars, each one representing dreams she was learning to reshape around this new reality. Single motherhood at 23 felt like being handed a map written in a foreign language. Those first years passed in a blur of night feedings and morning classes, scholarship applications, and rejection letters. Sarah's master's degree in education hung on their apartment wall like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Teaching positions required credentials she couldn't afford, and time she didn't have between Jamal's needs and the cleaning jobs that kept him fed. Hope became a luxury item, rationed carefully to stretch across endless months of barely scraping by. The cleaning company hired her when Jamal turned 2, offering night shifts that paid cash under the table while he slept at her sister's house. Corporate offices after midnight became her domain. Vacuum cleaners and industrial polish were tools of survival. She scrubbed conference tables where deals worth millions were negotiated, emptied trash bins that held documents revealing more money than she would earn in a lifetime. The contrast was sharp enough to cut glass, but she learned to focus on each paycheck instead of each injustice. Jamal's questions about his father began around age 4, innocent inquiries that felt like small arrows aimed directly at Sarah's carefully guarded heart. "Why don't I have a daddy like Tommy from school?" became a recurring theme during bedtime rituals and car rides to daycare. She crafted careful responses about different kinds of families, about love being more important than traditional structures. But children have radar for incomplete truths, and Jamal's eyes always suggested he knew she was editing the real story. The newspaper article appeared when Jamal was 6, Marcus's face staring out from the business section, with a headline celebrating his company's latest acquisition. Sarah's hands shook as she read about his charitable foundation and his speeches about supporting underprivileged youth. The irony tasted like copper pennies, bitter and metallic. She clipped the article and hid it in her jewelry box alongside other artifacts from their shared past. Love letters, concert tickets, photographs of a future that never arrived. Teaching finally became possible when Jamal entered 1st grade, though the salary meant continuing night cleaning shifts to cover rent and groceries. Sarah would grade papers at 2 a.m. between office buildings, red ink marking student mistakes, while exhaustion marked her own declining energy. Her classroom became a refuge where she poured maternal love into other people's children, giving them the attention and encouragement she sometimes struggled to provide her own son after 18-hour workdays. Jamal excelled in school despite their circumstances, his intelligence shining through like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He read voraciously, asking sophisticated questions about science and technology that reminded Sarah painfully of his father's curious mind. Teacher conferences became bittersweet celebrations of Jamal's potential, shadowed by conversations about programs they couldn't afford and opportunities that remained just beyond their financial reach. Talent without resources was like having wings without wind. The other mothers at school functions wore wedding rings and discussed vacation plans, while Sarah calculated grocery budgets and prayed her car would survive another month. She learned to navigate those social spaces with practiced grace, deflecting personal questions while celebrating her son's achievements. Jamal never complained about the differences between their life and his classmates, but Sarah saw him watching intact families with the same longing she had once felt watching Marcus drive away toward his chosen future. As Jamal grew older, his resemblance to Marcus became impossible to ignore. The same intelligent eyes, the same confident stride, the same habit of tilting his head when processing complex information. Sarah found herself avoiding mirrors when they stood together, afraid of what those genetic echoes might reveal about her own unhealed wounds. Love and resentment occupied the same space in her heart, fighting a daily battle that left her emotionally exhausted but determined to give her son the childhood he deserved, even if she couldn't give him the father he needed. Marcus Thompson had faced down hostile corporate takeovers, navigated SEC investigations, and survived 3 separate attempts to unseat him from his own company's board of directors. But nothing in his arsenal of executive experience had prepared him for the sight of his own eyes staring back at him from an 8-year-old face. The resemblance was undeniable, written in the architecture of bone structure and familiar till to Jamal's chin when he spoke with determination. 12 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed in an instant. The billionaire's hands began trembling almost imperceptibly, a physical response he couldn't control through willpower or breathing techniques learned in high-stakes boardroom negotiations. His heart rate spiked to levels usually reserved for hostile takeover announcements or market crashes that wiped out billions in value. But this wasn't about money. This was about a reckoning that had been building interest like a compound loan since the day he chose Stanford over Sarah, ambition over accountability. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus had always known this moment might arrive. During quiet moments between meetings, he sometimes wondered about the child Sarah had been carrying when he left for graduate school. But wondering was different from knowing. Hypothetical scenarios were different from reality, standing 50 feet away in a school uniform, calling him Dad in front of 500 witnesses and rolling television cameras. The abstract had become devastatingly concrete. His public relations training kicked in automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 press conferences and media interviews. Maintain composure. Control the narrative. Never let them see you sweat. But those strategies have been designed for questions about quarterly earnings and competitive positioning, not for confronting abandoned children who shared your DNA and your stubborn refusal to back down from uncomfortable truths. Some battles couldn't be won through corporate tactics. The faces in the crowd blurred together as Marcus's vision narrowed to focus entirely on Sarah Williams, the woman he had loved completely before learning to love success more. She looked older, worn down by years of struggles he had never bothered to imagine. Her cleaning uniform told the story of dreams deferred and opportunities denied, of choices made by necessity rather than preference. He had become a billionaire, while she scrubbed floors in buildings he probably owned through shell corporations. Memory flooded back like water through a broken dam. Sarah's laugh during their late-night study sessions, the way she challenged his assumptions about privilege and responsibility, how she made him want to be better than his own ambitions. He remembered the weight of her hand in his, the trust in her eyes when she told him about the pregnancy, the hope in her voice when she talked about their future together. Hope he had shattered with calculated coldness. The boy, his son, stood with the same posture Marcus recognized from his own childhood photographs, the same defiant stance he had used when facing down playground bullies and demanding explanations from adults who tried to dismiss his questions. Jamal had inherited more than just physical features. He had inherited the Thompson family's stubborn insistence on being heard, on demanding acknowledgement even when the stakes seemed impossibly high. The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree, even across 12 years of separation. Marcus's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his vocal cords apparently forgetting how to function under the weight of emotions he had spent decades learning to suppress. Board presentations and keynote speeches required practiced rhetoric, but this moment demanded something far more dangerous, authentic human response. The billionaire who could move markets with a single tweet found himself unable to form a single word in response to his son's simple recognition. The silence stretched between them like a chasm spanning 12 years of missed birthdays, absent bedtime stories, and unanswered questions about why some children had fathers who came home and others had fathers who chose empire building over family building. Every second of hesitation widened that chasm, making the eventual response either a bridge toward redemption or a final confirmation that money mattered more than blood, that success was worth more than love, that some choices could never be undone or forgiven. The weight of 500 stares pressed down on Marcus Thompson like a physical force, each gaze carrying expectations he couldn't possibly satisfy simultaneously. Corporate colleagues waited for him to dismiss this interruption with executive authority, while media representatives hoped for dramatic confession that would dominate news cycles for weeks. The cleaning staff watched nervously, recognizing that their colleague Sarah's future hung in the balance of whatever words came next. But the only opinion that truly mattered belonged to an 8-year-old boy who had inherited his father's eyes and his determination to be acknowledged. Marcus's mind raced through potential responses, each option carrying consequences that would ripple through lives and stock prices alike. He could deny everything, claim mistaken identity, let a security team escort the disruptive child away while his lawyers handled any subsequent paternity claims through non-disclosure agreements and strategic settlements. That path preserved his carefully crafted public image, while maintaining the emotional distance he had cultivated since leaving Sarah 12 years ago. It was a safe choice, the corporate choice, the choice that protected everything he had built. But something in Jamal's unwavering gaze stopped those calculations cold. The boy wasn't backing down despite the intimidating crowd and overwhelming attention. He stood his ground with the same stubborn courage Marcus had once used to build an empire from dormitory dreams. This was his son, not just genetically, but spiritually, displaying the Thompson family trait of refusing to accept dismissal when seeking truth. The recognition was mutual and undeniable, written in bone structure and behavioral patterns that 12 years couldn't erase. Sarah's eyes met across the crowded space, and Marcus saw everything he had abandoned reflected in her exhausted but dignified expression. She wasn't asking for anything, not money, not recognition, not explanations. She had survived 12 years without a support, raised their son into someone capable of standing before billionaires and demanding acknowledgement. Her strength shamed his weakness. Her resilience highlighted his abandonment. She had become the parent he should have been, while he became the success story he thought he needed to be. The boy took another small step forward, closing the physical and emotional distance that represented 12 years of separation. "I look just like you," Jamal said simply, his young voice carrying across the silent auditorium with devastating clarity. "Mama says I'm smart like you too. She says maybe that's why you left, because you were too smart to stay." The words landed like precision strikes, each one exposing another layer of Marcus's carefully rationalized choices. Time seemed suspended as Marcus faced the most important decision of his life. Every business success, every corporate triumph, every billion-dollar deal suddenly felt insignificant compared to this moment. He could continue building walls between himself and accountability, or he could choose the courage his 8-year-old son was demonstrating by standing here, demanding recognition. The powerful man who had conquered industries found himself learning about real power from a child in a school uniform. The auditorium held its collective breath as Marcus slowly stepped away from the podium, his prepared speech about artificial intelligence and market disruption suddenly irrelevant. Each step toward Jamal felt like walking through molten metal, every movement monitored by cameras that would preserve this moment for historical analysis. The distance between father and son had never been measured in feet. It had been measured in choices, in priorities, in the difference between what he wanted to be and what he was willing to sacrifice to get there. Marcus knelt down to Jamal's eye level, his expensive suit touching the marble floor that Sarah had probably cleaned countless times over the years. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The billionaire literally lowering himself to meet his son where he stood. "You do look like me," Marcus said quietly, his voice amplified by the auditorium's acoustics. So every word carried the back row. "And you're braver than I've ever been." The admission cracked something open in his chest that had been sealed shut since the day he drove away from Sarah's apartment. The boy's face transformed with a smile that contained every birthday wish, every Father's Day hope, every night he had fallen asleep wondering if his daddy might come home someday. "Does this mean you're not leaving again?" Jamal asked with a devastating directness that only children possess. The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding not just acknowledgement but commitment, not just recognition but presence. Marcus looked into eyes that were mirrors of his own and saw the chance for redemption he didn't deserve but desperately needed to earn.